What's up, everybody? Invincible Season 3 premieres this week, and so it's time to go back through the first two seasons of the show, and I did it so that you don't have to. Before we get into today's video, make sure to subscribe so that you don't miss out on any of my Season 3 breakdowns, and of course, just the daily videos here on the channel. But enough from me, let's talk Invincible. Alright, I'm gonna go season by season as I've got my cliff notes here for my rewatch on Sunday, and then at the end, I'll dive into season 3 casting news, as well as some of the other storylines I'm looking forward to the most in the new season. The show opened its first episode at the White House with a, in retrospect, hilariously long opening scene between two of the guards. Then, the Maulers attack as we meet them and the Guardians of the Globe, and that team featured Immortal, Darkwing, War Woman, Aquarius, Green Ghost, Martian Man, and Red Rush. As far as the titular character is concerned though, Mark, who will soon become invincible, gets his powers at work and everything changes. For one, his dad starts training him and, let's just say, Omni-Man doesn't exactly pull his punches with his son. But the part of it I love seeing is Mark as an overzealous hero with his father not being ready for this development despite it being one of his objectives to father a son who could help him conquer Earth. Now, as the show goes on, Nolan's human nurturing starts to take over, but not at first as he takes his first step towards conquering Earth here in episode 1. That's in the form of taking out the Guardians of the Globe, and it's an epic fight where he wipes all of them out for the time being. That fight leads to Cecil's introduction, and Walton Goggins as Cecil might just be my favorite casting from Robert Kirkman with this show, right next to Jason Mantzoukas as Rexplode. We meet Rex when Invincible fights alongside the Teen Team, and that's also where we meet Adam Eve, who will eventually become Mark's lover. Invincible teams up with the Teen Team when the Flaxans, an alien race, invade Earth. They invade multiple times throughout this episode, getting stronger with each return until Omni-Man gets involved. You'd think he's just helping his son out here, but he's actually saving Earth for the Viltrumites to come conquer it. This is also the episode where Damien Darkblood comes into the picture, and he's a demon detective who Cecil doesn't really want to believe because he's saying it was Omni-Man who killed the Guardians of the Globe. After that, the Guardians are finally buried, and Omni-Man, who was part of the team but not officially, speaks at the funeral. What makes that so great is that, in a sense, he is telling the truth about his relationship with them and what happened. He's just holding back on certain details that are rather important. Then before the new Guardians team can be assembled, Rexplode cheats on Eve with another member of the teen team, Duplicate. Eve doesn't join the team because of that, but the new team features Robot, Black Samson, Shrinking Ray, Duplicate, Monster Girl, and Rexplode. Which, speaking of Rex again, not only does he burn bridges with Eve, but he gets off to a bad start with both Monster Girl, who kicks his ass, and also Black Samson, who just doesn't have it in him to put up with Rex's shenanigans. But despite the new team being formed, Cecil still calls in Mark and Eve when Doc Seismic attacks Mount Rushmore. In doing so, Cecil kind of ruins Mark's first date with Amber, while Rex tries to get Eve back to no avail. That's when we get the first hint that she wants Mark for herself, but when she goes to see him, he's macking on Amber after their mission. Robot also breaks the Maulers out of prison, but it's only temporarily as he needs their scientific expertise. At the same time, Damien Darkblood pays a visit to the Grayson household and plants the seeds of doubt in Debbie's head. Then, in the same sense, Omni-Man starts preaching more and more to Mark about how they're saving humanity and saving Earth by taking control. That's a rich tale to tell though, considering what he's done is Debbie helps Olga, Red Rush's wife, sell her house, and she also kind of gives Debbie another push towards the truth, which, going back to Damien Darkblood, he's got an underneath Omni-Man skin with his investigation. Cecil continues to lean towards believing the demon too, as he tries to get Omni-Man on a mission to Mars, but it ends up being Mark instead of his father. On that mission, Mark saves the 4 US astronauts from being executed on Mars, but when a Martian replaces one of them, the Sequids rise once again. Back on Earth, Cecil banishes Darkblood to Hell in an effort to keep Omni-Man off of his trail until he can figure out how they're going to defeat a Viltrumite. We also got the reveal here that Robot freed the Maulers from prison because he wants a body of his own so that he can experience life with Monster Girl. As time passes, Mark's super activities increase drastically, and so he quits his day job at Burger Mart. The villain Titan is also introduced as he's sort of a collector for the bigger villain Machine Head, and Titan, he also has a soft spot when it comes to families because his family is the entire reason he does what he does. This was a big family arc too, as Mark and Amber have their first almost breakup. Debbie finds Dark Blood's book in the closet, pushing her further towards the truth again, and Eve walks out on her parents. Then, in the midst of all that, Titan turns to Invincible for help in overthrowing Machine Head. They have a massive battle with some goons that Machine Head hired to protect him, villains like Battle Beast, and even when the Guardians come in to help, they're no match. That fight leaves Mark, Monster Girl, and Black Samson in critical condition, and oh, Omni-Man watched his son get his ass beat too. Then enters D.A. Sinclair. In retrospect, the casting of Ezra Miller is quite funny for this role, but Eric Baza has taken over in the meantime and by the next time we see him. Also, once the three injured heroes are rushed to the GDA hospital, Black Samson's injuries actually end up bringing his powers back in a turn for the best. But Mark and Monster Girl, well, they aren't so lucky. Mark was out for 6 days, and so Eve helped cover for him because his identity is still pretty much secret to everybody. His father, Omni-Man, was of course there at the hospital too, and so Cecil treats the situation as if Darkblood is truly guilty, but he's speaking on the facts of the case with everything he knows about Omni-Man and what he did. Once Mark's recovered, he takes a visit to Uptown U with William and Amber to see if that's where he wants to be in the future. Speaking of futures, Eve moves out for good and sets up her treehouse as her new base of operations. She's shifting her focus towards saving people from, just everyday disasters instead of waiting for Kill Cannon or the Lizard League to show up. Back at Upstate U, one of Sinclair's cyborgs gets loose, and of course, Mark saves the day as Invincible, but he drives another wedge into he and Amber's relationship in doing so. His mother, Debbie, does the same with her and his father's, though, when she goes to see Art, the costume maker, about Omni-Man's bloody suit. Then, after his save, William figures out that Mark is invincible and he starts driving Mark and myself absolutely insane, but it ends up costing him. Rick goes to get them all beers, and when he's taken, William goes after him and he gets taken too, but Mark's far more concerned about getting his girl back than he is getting his annoying friend's guy back. Rick ends up becoming a cyborg, and William is taken, of course, before Invincible gets involved. William is able to break through to Rick, though, and so he aids Mark in taking D.A. Sinclair out of the picture for good. Then, this episode closed with a bang as Debbie confronts Nolan about killing the Guardians before the Mauler twins go dig one of the Guardians' bodies up, the Immortal. But the Grayson men are focused on their lady troubles right now as Mark reveals his powers to Amber with the hope of saving the relationship, but she already knew. Monster Girl also returns to the Guardians, finally recovered. His robot is working in two places at once, picking up his new body at the Mauler's lab where Rudy is born. Then, since the GDA was spying on the Grayson household, Debbie is taken to the Pentagon, leaving Omni-Man to search for his son and find the right way to explain things to him. When he returns home, he finds Cecil's cloaked men in the safe house across the street, obliterating everyone in his sight, including Donald. After that, Cecil calls the Guardians to be on standby and starts whipping out all of the toys as Omni-Man gets more aggressive in his search for his son. Those included a giant space laser, more of Sinclair's cyborgs, and even a freaking kaiju on steroids, but none of that's enough. Not even the Immortal, who was just brought back from the dead by the Maulers, can stop Omni-Man at this point, and he's got a crazy bloodlust for obvious reasons, but Omni-Man still tears him apart, which ends up being the reason Mark doesn't join his father in conquering this planet. That leads to Mark learning the truth of what the Viltrum Empire is actually doing, creating the perfect civilization through wiping out the weak in their population, and setting out to do that across the galaxy on suitable planets. Mark refuses to join his father, though, and so the fight of the century ensues. Omni-Man takes Cecil's people out before taking the fight with his son to Chicago and then finishing it on a mountainside where he leaves Mark beat into a pulp. When Mark says they could have been happy together there, Omni-Man flees Earth, abandoning his post. Cecil and the GDA get to Mark immediately as Cecil is being a genuine human for a change, taking care of everything for Mark and his mom. Once he recovers, Cecil takes Mark to the White Room and reveals that the Immortal is still alive, and also it makes me want to drink bottled water more than ever. Then once he's back home, Mark and Amber get back together unfortunately, and he goes out to give his mom some space and get his head on straight with the three people he can tell everything to. But even that's interrupted as Alan the alien returns to warn Mark about the Viltrumite on Earth and leaves with the knowledge that Mark is the most valuable asset that the coalition of planets has ever had. Season 1 comes to a close as the Sequids take over Mars, the Maulers are returned to prison, the Flaxans are plotting their revenge, Doc Seismic is alive with his new Magnemites, Titan is teaming up with Mr. Lou, Battle Beast is still out there, and D.A. Sinclair has built Cecil, an entire army of cyborgs. Then season 2 opens up in an alternate dimension where Mark joined his father in conquering Earth, but the true purpose of the scene was to introduce Angstrom Levy, the newest threat to Mark. On this world, the father-son duo wipe out anyone who doesn't join them except for Eve, who Mark paralyzes, and Angstrom, who teleports away. Then our Mark, the main Invincible, visits the site where his father almost murdered him before going out to continue his life as a hero. Levy is jumping around the multiverse too as he frees the Maulers, and we get a quick look at Multipole during that scene too. Anyway, Mark returns to school way too early, and honestly returns to saving lives too early too, as Cecil denies his request to get back out in the field for the GDA. He also pulls Robot as the leader of the Guardians, putting Immortal back on the team as leader and introducing the newcomer, Bulletproof. But that new team is still having problems, and so when the time comes, Cecil calls on Mark to take on Angstrom and the Maulers of the multiverse. Angstrom's trying to gain the knowledge of the multiverse to save trillions, but when he tries to save Mark from the Maulers, everything goes wrong. He's incredibly deformed by the explosion, and only one of the Maulers remains. He blames Invincible for all of that, and with all the memories of his variants, he can't separate the evil variants of Invincible from this one good version of Mark. The same goes for Immortal, who pays Mark a visit, not trusting anyone close to Omni-Man after everything that happened. Mark continues to go out into the field, even missing most of his graduation while he takes on Doc Seismic and his Magnemites at the Washington Monument. He does make it back in time to walk though, then he goes to Eve's treehouse to celebrate with his second family. But he can only have so much fun because he's on call 24/7, and this time he's sent to Midnight City, a city trapped in perpetual darkness. There, he finds the new Darkwing, formerly known as Nightboy, who's taken on the mantle and is trapped in the same darkness as the city he patrols. Which, speaking of darkness, Debbie is still in her own realm of it, and she freaks out on Cecil for overworking Mark. It's a necessity though, as Mark is pulled off to another mission, this time atoning for his father's sins by going to marry Aquarius' widow, but in the show they change it to a fight, and in the comics it was they get married, but he ends up saving her here once again despite Cecil's orders, and so he's all even with Atlantis. Then the Guardians of the Globe take on the Lizard League, and this is where we meet Shapesmith, the Martian who replaced the astronaut. He joins the Guardians after they defeat the League, and the League sees a reform as King Lizard eliminates Supreme Lizard. Also, we see another Invincible variant as Angstrom travels the multiverse going after them. But our Mark, the good Mark, is off to college in the meantime, and he gets laid on day one, and the show cuts away from that to give us a Unopan backstory. Some of their people survived, but they had to start breeding camps after the Viltrumite attack, and that's how Alan came to be. He informs the council about Mark, their greatest hope in years, and they're just still terrified of the Viltrumites. But that fear isn't misplaced as Alan is attacked and shredded by three of them when he's getting some grub with his girl, and Thetis, leader of the council, unplugs his healing chamber when he returns. Back on Earth, Debbie attends a super partner support group where she meets the Green Ghost's husband and only makes things worse for herself. But Rudy, the human form of robot, is making his life better as he goes out with Monster Girl for his first movie and his first burger. Then, just as Mark's settling back in at his dorm, Seance Dog appears, and it's really Nualzot of Thraxa. He said his planet was in danger, but when Mark arrives, his father is there waiting for him, and he's become the monarch of Thraxa. We do get to see how he got there, and his fall, for lack of a better term, from a pure-blooded Viltrumite to a nurtured one who cares for at least some humans. That nurturing occurred naturally as he raised Mark with Debbie and found a true family on Earth, which wasn't the mission. But Once he fled Earth, he flew for millions of miles before finding a Thraxan ship in peril and saving the day. That was kind of a fresh start for him, and it turned out he saved the Queen, which that's how he landed in the spot of Monarch on this new world. But more importantly, he had another kid. Back on Earth, Debbie's even worse off than when we last saw her, and Eve's going through it too as she goes to upstate U, hoping to find Mark, but to no avail. So, she goes to the old teen team hideout, where her failure in Chicago boils up and shows itself as she recklessly fights Kilcannon. Then, before he can get everything in order, the Viltrumites come for Omni-Man on Thraxa. Lucan finds Mark and almost takes him out right off the rip, but Nolan saves his son, and the pair go to take on the other two. That would be Thula and Vildor, and they put up a good fight, they're just not enough. Nolan tells Mark to read his books as he's dragged off, and then General Krieg gives Mark the same task his father had, prepare Earth for the Empire. Mark took his millionth beating in 5 days here though, and so he sticks around on Thraxa and recovers while helping them rebuild. By the time his ship's ready to take him home, Nualzot and Indressa are old bugs, as the Thraxans are the embodiment of life's too short, and so he takes his brother back to Earth at the request of the Queen. As you'd expect, Debbie freaks out at first, but she calms down and accepts a new member of their family once she sees Mark handling him. Over the GDA, Donald confronts Cecil as his memories of dying start to come back, and he knows he's the cyborg. On top of that, Cecil's got a ship full of Sequids inbound for Earth, and he's got to assemble the Guardians as the truth about Shapesmith is revealed. Cecil sends Immortal, Shapesmith, Eve, Mark, Samson, Bulletproof, Robot, and Monster Girl to stop the Sequids, while Rex, Kate, and Ray are going to have their hands full with the Lizard League. We leave the two teams as the Earth team seems to be screwed and overpowered by the Lizards, the Space team is in deep shit, and Alan wakes up only to learn Thetis, who revealed he's a Viltrumite, unplugged him hoping he'd come back stronger, which he did of course. Anyway, Rex actually manages to survive the fight with the Lizard League, even after King Lizard put some lead through his head. Shapesmith also manages to keep Rudy safe long enough for him to repurpose parts of his robot suit into a device to take out the Sequids. Both are technically successful, but when they clear the Sequids from the astronaut, even Rudy are taken over. Luckily, the device, it had another charge in it, so the mission is still a success, and it also mended some metaphorical wounds on the team. When Mark returns home, Debbie's given Oliver his name, and she's also fending off Cecil, trying to keep at least one of her kids out of the GDA's hands. Then, for the second time in 2 seasons, there's a funeral for the Guardians of the Globe, this one for Duplicate, and Immortal's alive and distraught as a motherfucker this time around. Cecil asks Eve to join the Guardians once again with everything going on, but she declines, and then Amber shows up with more relationship problems. Mark goes to Art for his side of that and ends up reading his dad's books, and in those books, Nolan hid the Viltrumite weaknesses like the Infinity Ray, Ragnar's, and other things throughout the galaxy. Then Cecil tells Immortal it's time for a vacation, and he instead spazzes out and goes to intercept Alan, who's returning to Earth. Once Mark diffuses things, he gives his father's books to Alan to take to the Coalition, giving him something for Thetis since Mark couldn't go himself. On top of all that, the threats are building for Earth in multiple corners. For one, Russ Livingston, the astronaut, swallowed a Sequid, and so the Guardians just moved him to their target unknowingly, and Angstrom, he's getting all dripped out for his next showdown with Mark. But before that can happen, Mark takes Amber to Comic-Con, and the show gets meta, talking about the big breaks between the seasons, which fans were rightfully very upset about. It was a shitty joke then, it was a shitty joke here on my 4th rewatch, and it'll always be a shitty joke. Anyway, Mark is called off by Eve when Rex tries to take on Octoboss on his own, and they team up to take down the Tentacled Freak. Then, staying with the Guardians, Immortal takes his leave, which puts Rudy back in the position of team leader. Then over at Upstate U, Rick is having terrible nightmares of what D.A. Sinclair did to him, and it's Donald who comes to the rescue here, considering his expertise in the cyborg arena. He gets Rick off the ledge, revealing he's died 39 times and is about 98% machine and 2% man. At the same time, Mark is trying to save this terrible relationship with Amber for like the trillionth time until Anissa crashes their dinner. She does help Mark save a cruise ship, but when he chooses the humans over the Viltrum Empire, again, she beats him to a pulp and also ends his relationship with Amber for good. To make things worse, Angstrom's back and he's got Debbie and Oliver hostage, waiting for Mark's return. Also, Anissa returns to General Krieg to report her failure and ends up catching Alan on his way back to the council, although he did end up wanting to be captured so he could get to Omni-Man. Nolan's being tested in prison because in Viltrumite culture you have to be strong enough for execution and he passes, so the clock's ticking. Same goes for Debbie and Oliver, as Mark only makes things worse when he arrives as he barely remembers Angstrom. That sets Angstrom off, and he also mentions that this is a first universe where Oliver exists, but he ends up sending Mark through different dimensions. Some of those were Jurassic, Agent Spider's home, zombies, cavemen, Gotham City, and eventually a wasteland. But then Angstrom's mind starts to shatter from the infinite memories, and he eventually tries to finish Mark himself, and that doesn't go as planned for either of them, as Mark beats him to a pulp and strands himself in this dimension because of that. Cecil takes care of Debbie and Oliver though, so at least they're safe. Then, after who knows how long passed for Mark, a future version of the Guardians come and save him, and despite Rex not wanting to damage the time stream, Eve tells him to give her younger self an answer once and for all. But before we see that, Immortal returns to his cabin only to find Duplicate alive. She'd been living through copies for some time, and it was actually Kate Zero who was the original, not Kate 1. Then, after everything he's been through, Mark drops out of college and goes to find Eve, but he's just not quite ready to tell her yet, especially with how shaken up he is over killing Angstrom, even after everybody tells him he had no other choice. Also, Alan has made contact with Omni-Man, and they're plotting their escape for Season 3. You guys still with me? We got one more episode to cover, the Adam Eve special, before we dive into some Season 3 speculation and news. That special got started with the Guardians taking on the Lizard League, obviously younger versions of both as it's set before the main show. Eve was incredibly gifted from a very young age, and her parents, especially her father, never changed in the sense of accepting her. We see her make her first and only friend, only to lose her when she reveals her powers, and to make things worse, she gets kicked out of school. That leads her to make her first save, and Dr. Brandyworth reveals himself as he's been keeping an eye on her. One of her very first fights in her career was against Kill Cannon 2, and she's of course still fighting him in the main show. It's also revealed that Brandyworth forced the mutation that gave her her powers when her mother, who was homeless and alone, was pregnant. Then, her siblings are released and they just don't have the Brandyworth touch, so they're not as fit for society. Their phases 1 through 5, well, 2 through 5 because Eve is 1, and they only got worse as the phases went along. The GDA, at least I believe it was the GDA, also had her mom, who was basically a vegetable, just pumping out these kids, or test subjects, that might be a more fitting term for these kids. Then, when both her mother and Brandyworth die, she breaks the mental block he put on her and unlocks more of her power. After that, she returns home to the family she's been given and that she's stuck with, not the family she wanted, before we see a young Mark with Debbie and Nolan in what I believe to be the moment Omni-Man's mission was a failure. Alright, now it's time to get into Season 3, and I'm going to stay as spoiler-free as possible, but if you want zero spoilers going into the season, this section of the video is where we're going to have to say goodbye, and I say thank you for stopping by the channel, and I hope to see you back for the Season 3 breakdowns. We've got villain-wise, Doc Seismic's best appearance in my opinion, featuring every freaking hero on the planet, Powerplex in his quest for revenge after Chicago coming into the picture, and also I'd assume the Invincible War will be the final arc of Season 3. We also have Mark and Cecil butting heads to look forward to as things get real iffy between Mark and the GDA. There's no limit of reasons for that, but some of my favorites I hope to see are Oliver killing the Maulers, Darkwing and the Reanimen appearing, and Mark seeing D.A. Sinclair mid-argument with Cecil. Then we're also getting into the good relationship, Mark and Eve, as I prefer these two together both in the show. No offense, Sassy Beats, you're great, and in the comics too. Their struggles are just less annoying, and their team-ups are so damn fun. But I will say, Sassy Beats will return, and Amber, she gets into trouble with a new guy, and that's a great storyline that I do hope to see this season. Finally, we've got 9 new cast members. Aaron Paul as Powerplex, Kate Mara as Becky Duvall, Powerplex's wife, John DiMaggio as the Elephant, Zima as Mr. Liu, and I'm sorry if I mispronounced that, Sholo Mariduena as Fightmaster and Dropkick, Christian Convery as Oliver, and Simu Liu as Multipole. Then these last two, I'm making a guess on who they are, but Jonathan Banks as Conquest, maybe, and Doug Bradley as the Viltrumite Thrag, maybe. And so that'll do it for today's video. This video and my rewatch of the show kind of lit the fire on my hype, and it was much needed because I've been real down on this show at points, even calling it mid-vincible as a joke. But my hype is up now. What about yours? Let me know what you want to see from Invincible Season 3 down in the comments below, and make sure you have a great day.